Yeah, but even with these supposedly strict categories, it wasn't a hard science. So people with partial Jewish ancestry, so a Mischling, could sometimes apply for exemptions. They could be declared German blood if they had the right political connections, or if they were just useful enough to the regime.
So yeah, I guess what you're trying to say is like it's the laws were more like guidelines. It was initially supposed to be about racial purity, but it turned into this weird, you know, game of exceptions, right? Paperwork, favoritism, and lots of bending the rules. And then the question becomes, how do you even figure all this out? Like how do they go about categorizing people? Like clearly they had to set up giant databases, right? And they had to like look through, I don't know what, like church records or interview people. Like this wasn't the age of the internet, right? Like they don't have like databases like we do. How do you take millions of citizens and then start slicing them up by bloodlines? That's like the biggest family tree project, like manual family tree project ever.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, they didn't have computers or databases like we do today. So
Mm-hmm.
they like you said, they leaned heavily on church records. So they looked at things like baptism certificates and like marriage registries and things that would be kept by a pastor. If you wanted to if you wanted to prove you're Aryan, you had to gather your family's documents, and then sometimes you would have to go back, 3 or 4 generations, and you would have to present a birth certificate or something else that proved of your Christian ancestors. Um, if there was any doubt, officials would dig deeper into you, and then they would start digging into like synagogue records or cemetery registries, or they would even just interview people.
Mm-hmm.
They would interview your neighbors or your coworkers or your old classmates if they really like wanted to get you. They would figure out a way to get you. Basically, they would talk to anyone who might remember something about your family's background, and it just turned into like this massive paper chase.
Mm-hmm.
It the entire government departments were set up just to investigate racial ancestry, especially after the Nuremberg laws. And a lot of it wasn't even consistent because when you think about it, like different regions enforced it differently. Some investigators were probably strict,
Mm-hmm.
and then some were willing to not look the other way, or just like take fraudulent paperwork if you had the right connections, or
Take a
or
bribe,
um
maybe. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
or yeah, take a bribe. So it
Mm-hmm.
was probably it was probably a unique experience for everyone, depending on where you lived and who you were presenting these documents to.
Right. I mean, it sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare. It also sounds like an epic waste of time and money. Like epic waste of time and money. Forget about the morality standards, right? Like how inefficient this must have been, right? To just try and figure out how Jewish somebody is, right? Or the other way around, how Aryan somebody is. It's just such a waste of time. Um, yeah, it's not like they could just like run a genetic test like they could right today. And even if they could, like, what would they even test for? Like, there's no like single like Jewish gene, right? Jewish communities are a mix of Middle Eastern and European and North African ancestry. It's not some neat biological thing you could just swab for. And like in the 1930s, like genetic science was still in its infancy anyway. They barely understood blood types, let alone anything close to DNA. So it's just
Yeah, you're right. There is no such thing as a Jewish gene.
right.
And I mean, like, I don't know when genetic science first became really prevalent, but 1930s, I don't imagine they had the ability to really do that at scale, at the very
Mm-hmm.
least. You could have had a guy who looked completely Aryan, so tall, blonde, blue-eyed, um, who had like no connection to Judaism at all. Probably didn't even know that he or she had Jewish ancestry, and then one day, just suddenly, he's classified as a Mischling.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a story from the Riggs book, and I'm gonna paraphrasing it because I don't have it right in front of me, but basically he explains like the story of this guy. He's this tall blonde guy who looks like he would be on um on a propaganda poster.
Mm-hmm.
And the party knew that there was going to be a Michelin coming, and he arrives with his friend, and everyone is kind of expecting, they're looking for the Jewish guy, and they think the Jewish guy is his friend because his Jewish guy is like the shorter guy with like darker hair.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they figure out this guy is Jewish, the tall blonde guy, everyone was shocked. They're like, "Oh my god, that guy! Like we all thought it was him. Your friend who was."
It's crazy. Don't judge a book by its cover, right?
Yeah, I mean,
But even then, like
people look
neither of
different.
these technically are Jewish, right? Like they're both of these people, I presume, weren't practicing Jews, and the
No,
Mischling presumably was either second or first degree Mischling, so like only half at most of his grandparents were Jewish to begin with. So
yeah,
like this person probably didn't identify as, like, identity was out the window at this point, right? They didn't care what you identified as, but he probably didn't identify as a Mischling. Probably identified as a German, right? Certainly
yeah.
looked like one, right?
That was the conundrum that many
Mm-hmm.
people, and you have to think about, like that's got to be pretty hard to go through,
Yeah.
um, to have this like classification thrown on you when you, in many cases, probably just had maybe you knew, but like it wasn't a big part of your life, and then you're like, oh shit, this might be a problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's there's so many contradictions in the story because sometimes looks did matter. Sometimes the National Socialist would flag people just because they look Jewish.
Right.
So it really depended. Sometimes they would look at you physically, and sometimes it was just a matter of looking at your paperwork. But the point is, it could be very arbitrary at times. And officially it was supposed to be about bloodlines, but of course, like stereotypes played a role. And of course, like a big thing is like personal grudges, because
Right.
if you know somebody, let's just say if you're competing with somebody or you have like a personal enemy, and you figure out that guy, or that person is a quarter Jewish, you can use that against them.
Right.
You
Like
can bring,
snitch
and
on
there's like
people.
plenty of
Yeah.
cases in the Riggs book where that happens, where like there's this bureaucrat who has this personal enemy, and then they kind of flag him as Jewish. And it may be like, some of the cases were like nothing to do with it. They were like personal grudges, like dumb stupid grudges,
Yeah.
um
And that
where
I mean, just think
people
about
get
like
crazy.
the bureaucratic bullshit you had to go through when the German government thought that you were Jewish, right? Like you had to go find birth certificates up to 2 to 3, maybe even 4 generations back. Like you had to have your grandparents' birth certificates or like some other documentation proving that you weren't Jewish, even if you absolutely weren't Jewish. Maybe you just kind of looked Jewish, or maybe it's just like you said, Henry, somebody had a grudge on you and they said, "Hey, that guy over there, he's Jewish, and I happen to know it." And now you got to prove that you're not, because there wasn't any innocent until proven guilty on these types of stories. Now you got to waste all your time and put in all this effort, and it's still even possible that maybe you can't produce the documents to prove that you're not Jewish, even though you aren't Jewish. In this case, it's crazy, and I think I kind of want to talk a little bit about like what happens when the Germans actually discover that somebody is half Jewish, or at least when they get the inkling that someone was half Jewish. Like, how did how did they decide which of these people, which of these Jews, half Jews, were able to serve?
So um if the Germans found out that someone was half Jewish, depending on the circumstances, you could be okay.